Hello, 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 and welcome to another episode of There's Been Growth, the Capsule Podcast. And in this episode, we're going to be talking about liberation, or to put it in a more fancy way, we're going to be exploring the transformative power of liberation and challenging societal norms that limit our authenticity. So I thought the best way to start out is with a definition, because I think definitions are really important. And so the definition of liberation is freedom from limits on thoughts and behaviors. Really short and to the point, but I really think that it's really impactful, and we're going to dive deeper into that in this episode. So Frantz Omar Fanon, he is an African Caribbean psychiatrist and political philosopher. And as I was doing some reading and trying to think about like what I wanted to cover in this episode and what I wanted the episode to look like, I came across him, and there was a quote that I thought was really, really good that I'll read. Sometimes people hold a core belief that is very strong. When they are presented with evidence that works against that belief, the new evidence cannot be accepted. It would create a feeling that is extremely uncomfortable called cognitive dissonance. And because it is so important to protect the core belief, they rationalize, ignore, and even deny anything that doesn't fit in with that core belief. Frantz Fanon. And so that is from Black Skin, White Masks. I would encourage you to definitely check them out. I've been researching and exploring their background and some of the things that they've put out, and it's pretty dope. So I thought that quote really fit in with this. Really, if you think about it, the only examples and perspectives that we have and that really shape the core of who we are come from the communities that we grow up in, the family structures that we grow up in, even larger community ideologies that we, over time accept as norms, that, the people around us, the people that came before us, basically accepted as norms, or how boys and girls should think and behave from early childhood. And that kind of carries over into how we kind of think and how we act and how we see the world, I guess you could say, to put it more broadly, as we grow up. And with that, to the quote that I had, or that I included earlier, it becomes difficult to really see beyond that. Just think about being in, for me, a smaller town in Mississippi. And I felt like I had to really assimilate to the values and to the perspectives of that small town in the South, in Mississippi, even though a lot of the things and the ideas and the perspectives I just really didn't agree with. But I felt the best way to get through it at that point in time was to shrink myself, essentially. And it goes without saying that I rarely ever felt like I fit in. And as I've really grown older and reflect back on that time, it just really was a very cookie cutter set of values in a way that was accepted as to who you were to be, how you were to act, what you were to look like. And if you were anything outside of that, anything that was other, it was talked about, it was looked down upon, it was gossiped about, or what have you. Because let's be very clear, growing up, I'm about to turn 30, obviously, the point of this podcast. I grew up in a time where, and it's still, it's pretty prevalent now, where straight was the standard. Anything outside of that, anything on the spectrum outside of that exact thing was the other, was not accepted. It made it very much harder to explore yourself and learn yourself and be around people that really looked like you, considering that it wasn't accepted, nor was it the standard to be anything other than a heterosexual, man or woman at that point. So, you think about growing up in that and what that looks like, and not having any outlet to explore who you really are. That just, it starts to crack, it starts to show through. It doesn't work. It just really equates in a delay of grasping the fullness of who you are, or who you truly are meant to be. So an example of that, for me, was I never really had the opportunity to explore my sexuality without it truly just being pushed upon me. And, like I said earlier, the standard was straight, heterosexual. Anything other than that was ridiculed, talked about, gossiped upon. And, it's not without saying that, high school, middle school, those times are very formative in trying to figure out who are you, what does that look like romantically, sexually, or what have you. And that becomes a very, very difficult process because of traits or qualities that you may exhibit that are seen as the other, it results in ridicule, gossip, and people making up what your reality is before you've had a chance to try to figure it out for yourself. And so that can be a very difficult space. I think that's why it's important to maybe set a reminder in this space, or maybe a note that for any little Black queer people or folk that are coming up that you may be around or that you might interact with or know, let's be intentional about creating safe spaces for them, or, creating a place where they can explore themselves without ridicule and shame. And if you don't have any queer folk that you might interact with, make sure that if you have younger people that might be interacting or around someone like that we're being understanding and intentional and graceful about interactions and what that looks like. I'm about to turn 30. I don't know what the high school antics or the climate is there. I think I've heard that it is a more accepting place. If not, I really would hope that it is. And if not, as I said, this really can serve as a space for a reminder. It can be hard trying to explore that in a space where it's really not a lot of people that you can connect with that look like you and that are walking in the fullness of who they are comfortably. So it's only made worse by ignorance and people ridiculing and gossiping and making it even worse. So back to those core beliefs. So these core beliefs ingrained from childhood shape our perceptions and can make it challenging to imagine, like I said earlier, other ways of living, ways that might be outside of the communities that you live in, where you have grew up, or what's been accustomed to a neighborhood or the family structure that you've grown up in. And that can go anywhere from what does your career look like, or what does it have to look like, or do you have to go to college, or is that a requirement in the family structure that you've grown up in, even to the point of how you're supposed to dress or how you're supposed to talk or how you're supposed to essentially just show up in general. It can be very limiting to grow up in an environment where there is a certain set of ways or standards for all those things, but it just doesn't align with who you are at the end of the day. And it weighs on you, and essentially at some point it's gonna crack through. It's not a facade that you can keep up forever. Where I'm trying to go with that is, I see a lot of posts that say bring back shame, and I think the connection, hear me out. I think the connection that I'm trying to make here is that perpetuating shame often opposes beliefs without context. And it's really essential to challenge that. There is a multitude of reasons and ways of why people do the things that they do. Life is hard. We're all out here trying to explore what life needs to look like for us all. And, the same grace that you would want when it comes to exploring who you are, what makes you comfortable, I think it's really important that we extend that to other people. If something is not directly harming me or others, I'm really of a strong mindset that it's not really my business. I can have a flurry of opinions, but I'm really careful to not spew that or, try to perpetuate shame on people's ways of living. Because as I said, it's really hypocritical when you consider that we all are out here trying to figure it out. We're all out here trying to, figure out how we can, get through this life the best way that we know how, in the most efficient and honestly easiest way we know how. So pushing shame and perpetuating these, shameful or making people feel bad about the choices that they might make in life, or trying to explore what their other isn't really a good or a nice practice. I just feel like we all should really mind the business. I think something also important to name here is that a lot of my experiences, a lot of your experiences mirror other people's experiences. And when people make posts degrading someone's decision when it comes to exploring their body, their sexuality, or what have you, it feels a bit hypocritical. And, it can push maybe your friend, maybe your cousin, maybe someone close to you that much further away from, being vulnerable, opening up, or, trying to work through some of the choices they may have made or what that looks like. And so it's just something to think about. We're all more alike than we think, as I've said in, I think, another episode of this podcast. And, when we're pushing shame or pushing judgment on things, I think it's important to try to not do that, because you never know who you're really talking about. And like I said, we're all out here trying to make it. And so it's not it. It's really not it. And there's no barometer that any of us possesses as it relates to judging someone else. And there's not a scale, no matter what kind of perspectives you grew up with or that you have, that makes it that much better than anyone else's, where there's a tip of the scale that any of us can have. To also add to that as well, there's just so many perspectives and norms and beliefs that have been passed down from generation to generation to generation that no one really has any context of. And if we're being very honest, it really didn't get, our ancestors always in the best of places. And so, I think that's also something to really consider. As I said, all in all, I just think it's just really important for us all to just mind our business. I know I mentioned earlier, growing up as a gay Black boy, it was really tough trying to explore what my sexuality looked like for myself. But I do applaud myself for being intentional about doing that and exploring my own set of values and beliefs for what it was worth. In a smaller town in Mississippi in the South is a lot harder than it just sounds on the surface. Trust me. And I think it's really interesting, and I want to definitely mention here that there were vehicles that definitely opened me up to let others in on my sexuality and feel in love for another queer man, honestly. 2 of my previous relationships led me to letting my parents in and ultimately introducing them to my partners at the time. And although both of those experiences didn't work out for whatever reason, I am thankful because that propelled me further in exploring my sexuality. Not that I obviously did not dibble and dabble, but in terms of feeling what I knew was true love at that time, or what I knew was love at that time. And so I'm thankful for that. And so if I look back on where even the definition of a relationship for me, if I look back in high school, middle school, what a relationship looked like or meant to me then, even through like what a relationship meant for me in college and what that meant for me after college, and even what it means for me now. Like, I'm just very thankful for my intention behind still exploring what Black queer love can look like for me, despite the small mindsets that I might have grew up around, or the small perspectives or the limiting beliefs that I might have grew up around. I still found a way to explore my sexuality and explore myself for myself. And, I am thankful for that. And even though it might have been a difficult up and down process that came with a lot of, back steps for forward steps, I am thankful for where I am now, and for that progression, and for pushing myself to want to explore more and to explore other and different, because I did not see myself or acceptance for the pieces or parts of myself in where I grew up or the environment that I grew up in. And so that's definitely one piece of it. And then I would also say, in terms of my career, I walked away from 2 jobs that in 2021, actually, I walked away from 2 jobs that just didn't really align with who I am for myriad of reasons. But the aftermath of that was really just transformative to redefining what happiness means for me, what success means for me. I think at that point I had based success on my career, and I stayed in places based on what I thought I was supposed to do and the optics and the image surrounding things and what I thought others would think. And that just led to burnout and to me just not feeling, adequate, not feeling competent. And in that, although a very dismal and sad time, I honestly would say, it led me to boundaries. And, I have a whole episode on that where I explore that more deeply. But boundaries honestly became my cure for burnout. And I've honestly, as it relates to especially work-life balance and how I show up in work, I've been recalibrating those over time, and I will continue to, because it's truly important, especially in your career, that you build a career path and a job, even a job that really aligns with what you want out of your career and what you want out of this life. It's bad enough that capitalism exists and we have to work for things that should be, general resources that we have access to by virtue of needing them to live and survive. But it's made even worse by doing things to make that living that you just truly don't enjoy or in environments that you truly do not like. Yes, having livelihood and having a means to income and a source of income is important, but I would just, press that you consider that, peace of mind and being in places that you are comfortable and can thrive in and that align with your values really mean just as much as having a source of income, I would argue. And that's just something to think about. And it's really better to think about that proactively than be in a place like me where burnout is where you have to explore those things, which is basically exploring them at the bottom of the pit. So it's definitely something to really just explore and think about as you think about your career and how, these perceptions of how we're all meant to work these corporate, very cookie cutter professions and really try to explore what it looks like for you to do things for yourself. Not worrying about what others think, not worrying about what the community perspective put on you, but more so worrying about what do I want to do? What does that look like? And how do I explore that? And how do I also incorporate work-life balance and show up in a way that makes me feel comfortable in the place and the environment that I'm working in? So, those are definitely things to think about. And as it relates to other people, it's really your business, your life, and your career. And, you have to make yourself happy at the end of the day. I think perpetuating shame and negativity and judgment on people is just really tired. And so I think we all can look at our own personal journeys and what we are trying to accomplish and figure it all out, because this shit is very complex, and lend that same grace to someone else. I think that's definitely something to take away as we conclude this episode. So just all things to think about. I think in conclusion, the TLDR, no shame, embrace liberation, exploring yourself. We are trying to figure it out, so stop judging people and let's mind our business. So as a wrap up to this episode, one of my Twitter mutuals and someone that I call friend and I've had the pleasure to meet in person and I love dearly, wrote a book called Raw Poetry and Prose. Shout out to Fonz. So as I was reading through the book and looking at the different pieces, there's really one that stood out to me and resonated with me called Might Have Cried When I Wrote This. I'll read it and then I'll kind of give just a little context on why it really spoke to me, even though I think that it'll be pretty clear based on what I've spoken of in the episode, why this fits in so perfectly and intimately. So, Might Have Cried When I Wrote This. I remember it like it was yesterday. The words like fatal jabs, the rumors about me liking boys, the jokes that made them laugh. I remember holding hands with him under tables for none to see, and how I oddly felt at ease, though it was all new to me. I remember them calling me pussy, and how often I had to react. I remember every boy who swung a fist, not expecting that I'd swing back. I remember the teachers being complicit, and somehow even then, I knew. It was clear my schoolmates hated my guts, but perhaps they hated me too. I remember my mother's softness, her love felt like a shield, the reason I remained a delicate rose, encased in solid steel. I remember my father's cruelty and how his presence made me shake. The first man to force respect from me, the first man I had learned to hate. I remember escaping in story. I remember staying up late nights. I remember the fiction that stirred my soul and inspired me to write. So to every boy called faggot, to every child made to feel shame, to every kid called every slur and forced to sport it like a name, I wish you strength and protection from harm in a space where your spirit can roam. I pray you healing wherever you find joy and build from there a home. And so somewhere else in this episode, I know that I mentioned growing up and trying to explore my sexuality with it being forced on me before I really had the chance to do it for myself. And, exploring liking another boy or figuring out what these feelings that I was feeling was made so much more difficult by the environment that I was put in. And so finding a space to still explore myself and find out, what it feels like and to explore liking another boy or what have you, thinking about, being bullied growing up for my sexuality and all of the different things that happened that surrounded that. Like, I feel like this poem just really speaks to this. And also to the point I made earlier about really taking care and being intentional when it comes to little Black gay boys or little queer folks. Like, just really, really take intention because it's such a potentially difficult place to be in. And so I just thought that that was just so beautifully written. And in conjunction with everything else that I mentioned, I just think that it was just a great way to wrap it up and to sum up this episode. So shout out to Funds once again, a beautiful, beautiful body of work that, equates and reflects a beautiful, beautiful person. And I would just also like to say that I am not a spoken word person, never professed to be. So I am pretty sure I did not do the beautifulness of that poem the best when I recited it. I will say I know that Fonz has done a reading of this book. I suggest you go and catch one of those for a much better reading of this. I think in that, I kind of got into it or whatever. I would not say that I know I didn't write it, but it really made me think of Giselle when she was having to read that book in Real Housewives of Potomac in front of everybody that she wrote and how she was just, really struggling. And that just really is how I kind of felt then. So yeah, beautiful, 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 beautiful book, beautiful piece. Love it, love him. So yeah, just really thought it was a great wrap up.